If there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
I see, sir.
Oh, you can call me Luke.
I see, Sir Luke.
No, just Luke.
Oh. And I am C-3PO, Human Cyborg Relations. And this is my counterpart, R2-D2.
Hello.
You, I suppose you're programmed for etiquette and protocol.
Protocol? Why, it's my primary function, sir. I am well versed in all the customs.
I have no need for a protocol droid.
Of course you haven't, sir. Not in an environment such as this. That is why I have been programmed.
What I really need is a droid who understands the binary language of moisture evaporators.
Evaporators? Sir, my first job was programming binary load lifters, very similar to your evaporators in most respects.
Can you speak bocce?
Of course I can, sir. It's like a second language to me. I'm as
Yeah, all right,
fluent in...
shut up. I'll take this one.
Shutting up, sir. Oh, nice to see a familiar face. How rude. Sir, I am fluent in 6 million forms of communication. This signal is not used by the Alliance. It could be an Imperial code.
Sir, it will take quite a while to evacuate the T-47s.
Well, forget the heavy equipment. There's plenty of time to get the smaller modules onto the transports.
Take care, sir.
Thanks.
Terribly sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. Please don't get on. No! Stormtroopers. Here. We're in danger. I must tell the others. Oh no! I've been shot!
This protocol droid might be useful. Fit him with a restraining bolt and take him back up to His Excellency's main audience chamber.
R2, don't leave me!
You're a feisty little one, but you'll soon learn some respect. I have need for you on the Master's sail barge, and I think you'll fill in nicely.
Yes, R2, I was just coming to that. Toronto, gosh. Master Luke at Chimney Chudu. Uto Millennium Falcon at Chimney Cloud City. Us, Nutch, Vader. Han Solo. Ticolo Carbon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me today I have James. Say hi, James.
Hello again. Welcome.
We are going to be kind of following up on one of our previous episodes that we did about stormtroopers. You know, the subject is obviously Star Wars, and previously we examined kind of like the life cycle and how the whole concept of stormtroopers came from and how it worked. This time around, we're going to examine droids. In the Star Wars films, nobody really refers to robots as robots. Lucas purposely, I believe, wanted to call it something else. So it's basically the word android shortened to droid. And everybody in these films seem to refer to that.
And he now owns the copyright to the word droid.
Right. As a matter of fact, we've seen it on the droid phone commercials.
Every phone that is called a droid gets a little bit of a reference to George Lucas.
And I'm sure Lucas gets a couple dollars
I don't
probably.
I don't know what the deal was, but that's a great gig.
Can you imagine that? You create a word and now people are paying you for it. Well, let's first examine, obviously, in the whole Star Wars universe, droids are there for a specific purpose. But before we get into the fictionalized world of what's their place, what's their function, how are they different, how are they the same, let's talk a little bit about the development of the droid character in these films. Obviously, it all starts with Star Wars. That's our jumping off point. But in order to get to Star Wars, he had to develop the character of the droids. Now, James, tell us a little bit about how, from what I remember, at a certain point, Lucas decided that the droids were kind of going to be not only a little bit of the comic relief, but they were also going to be kind of like your tour guides of where the story is taking you from location to location. They're kind of there almost as your eyes peering into these weird situations. Tell us about the background of where the pair of C-3PO and R2-D2 come from.
Well, assuming you believe that Star Wars is a derivative, an homage to movies Lucas grew up with or was fond of, the movie The Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa from Japan has a similar story outline. There's a fortress, which to us is the Death Star. There's a knight, a samurai, and there are two basically bums.
Farmers.
They're two, they're not very sophisticated. They're bumbling in a lot of ways, and one's bigger than the other, in fact. And R2 and 3PO became the manifestation of those. When he decided, hey, I can use this as a bit of an outline for what I'm doing, they took that role. Now, I think it's a smart move. It's a science fiction world. It's a space world. And obviously, robots do give you that connotation. Now, I think in addition to the fact that they were robots or droids, there is a movie called Silent Running from the early 70s, and it had a cute, smaller robot. Now, there's some people who say, including the creator of Silent Running, that R2 is a similar type of character to his little... They were small droids. They were helping on the farm spaceship in Silent Running. So they're just a cute little something. I don't know if R2 was supposed to be the cuter one. I do know that C-3PO was supposed to be more slick. He wasn't supposed to be like an English gentleman. He was supposed to be more like a used car salesman. Right. I mean, I don't know if anybody knows car salesmen like that. It's been years since anybody's been like that, but like probably somebody with maybe a Brooklyn kind of, hey, I can give you this or I can take care of you. Watto is probably more like a used car salesman now than C-3PO. And thank God Anthony Daniels was, so good at what he did to change his mind.
Well, the characters, or those specific characters, you had two things to deal with. One was, like you said, the personalities. The other one was the look. And as far as I remember, you're right, the personalities were kind of like that. One was supposed to be the slick car salesman, but then when they started moving more towards comic relief, it was more like, okay, who's the straight man and who's the funny man?
Maybe an Abbott and Costello type of situation.
So, and you kind of can see that C-3PO is
taller,
is the prissy,
he's the Bud Abbott,
kind of like Felix and Oscar type, that kind of scenario. Now, the look...
Well, that goes back to Macquarie.
Well, yeah, from what I remember, the look, the basic guideline that Macquarie was given in terms of drawing something. And Lucas had somewhat of an idea, but obviously he wanted something nice drawn to present to people, for funding reasons. But C-3PO was Metropolis,
the
was
male
the inspiration.
version of the Metropolis robot.
A golden humanoid type, initially with almost female-ish kind of facial features, almost.
Yeah, androgynous maybe.
Right. And then through its many changes, they kind of honed in more into a more robotic face, less emotional, less descriptive. Obviously, nothing moves in the face. There's no lips. The voice just comes out, so that's how that worked. With R2, yes, Silent Running was kind of the inspiration in terms of saying, give me a little guy kind of like that. But because in Silent Running you're dealing with these little square robots, Lucas said, all right, give me the opposite. Give me something roundish or something.
Exactly.
And initially, one of the initial drawings I remember seeing is that the roundish R2 type of machine is running on one round wheel. Later, they added the two legs.
When they realized there was no way they were going to get
it was very difficult to get something like that to work. And then after that, they added the third leg even, for certain shots that you couldn't do movements with just two legs. So that's kind of how they honed into the whole idea of that. The multi-arm features of R2 were
one
first
that Macquarie
there.
eventually settled on was very utility. And now I don't know if they already knew he was going to be used primarily on spaceships or in the flying of a spaceship, so he would need a lot of arms to be able to work things. I don't remember.
But initially, it looked from those initial drawings, it looked as if all those arms were always going to be sticking out, almost like an octopus type of looking robot. But then they kind of said, all right, he can hide all those arms and be a little more, I guess, aerodynamic, if you will. But yes, the relationship between the two turned into both of almost like a narrator type of purpose, but then also the comic relief. They're always bickering with each other.
They're always there with the action. So theoretically, the story we're getting from a long time ago has been saved by these droids and told again and again.
Now, the purpose of, as far as the fictional story goes, in terms of, okay, what are these droids? Are they
What do they do in this world?
Right. Are they other people? Do they have rights as humans or creatures do? Or are they more like blenders and toasters?
I'd say they're more like blenders and
Yes,
toasters.
yes. I mean,
restraining bolts, banned from bars.
now, it depends on, there is an undercurrent of almost like they really dislike them to the point of almost like
There's
racism.
droid
almost.
racism.
Yeah. But it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
We've seen certain characters who are nice to droids, certain characters who are even nicer to droids. I guess it depends on your environment. In Tatooine, for Luke, there's in such a desolate area. There's nobody around. I guess
Droids are what keep the farm
right. They help
running.
them not only run the thing, but Luke seems to have a somewhat of a respectful, friendly demeanor towards them, as opposed to his uncle, who's like, yeah, whatever, get out of my way. You move over here, do this, do
Get
that.
the droids out there. On the
Right,
farm.
right. So you get that feeling, and when you move through the Star Wars films, they expanded on it a lot, obviously on the prequels. On the original films, you don't see too many droids. I mean, when they did the special editions, they added a lot more CGI and stuff
Actually,
like that.
but let me correct you. If you watch a non-special edition version, I bet you there's anywhere from 15 to 20 droids, and you might not even realize.
But background.
Yeah, and recently I've checked that out, and I've watched, and it's amazing. On the Blockade Runner, there's at least 5 or 6 droids apparent. On the Death Star, obviously the Death Star droid, the mouse droid.
What I
there's
mean,
various
maybe
other.
I misspoke. What I mean is you don't see a lot of interaction the way you do with C-3PO and R2-D2.
Okay.
The droids are in the background, but you can't tell. Are they in the background as equipment, or are they really interacting with people the way that people seem to interact? I mean, you have different types of interactions. Keep that in mind. Han Solo really dislikes C-3PO and doesn't respect them
my
much.
bet is the droids on the Death Star aren't being invited to dinner.
Yeah. I mean, Chewbacca is not as mean, but you can kind of tell he doesn't really
He doesn't have any patience.
care
or any-
much.
yeah.
Even though in Empire, he's fixing C-3PO and, I guess is somewhat of a gesture. I mean, he's trying to find out what happened, but he's being nice
Well,
to
he's
C-3PO.
formed a bond, like I think with the rest of the characters. They showed they gave him that human quality of bonding with.
Leia seems to have a more professional
Well, I imagine
relationship
her
with
use for droids would be more like a C-3PO type droid, the protocol, translation, things like that for her.
diplomacy,
her
that sort of
exactly.
thing. But the nicest person I've seen in the original trilogy is Luke, in terms of not only the fact that he is not mean to his droids, but by the time you even get to the end of New Hope and Empire, he's very friendly with R2, to a point where this is a conversation we've been having for a while, is can Luke understand what R2 is saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like a cat or a dog who just has certain emotions that you respond to, or if there's somehow, these chirps and beeps mean something to him at some point. Like you said on the X-Wing, there's probably some type of translation that, loosely translate what he's saying.
Yeah, on A New Hope, I think, or even Empire, you do see a shot of the translation, and there's like a little screen, I think was basic, and you see these weird squiggles, and Luke is like reading them. Yeah, and he's like, no, Arthur, everything's fine, and whatever, back and forth. But once he's in Dagobah,
they are having conversation before Yoda appears.
But you mentioned that before, that is he really conversing with him, or is it like you said, is he talking to a cat?
Yeah, it's a desolate place. He's a bit like weirded out or lonely.
It's either talk to yourself or talk to your droid.
Yeah, and there is some type of sentience there.
Right.
So what he's saying is being responded to, even if he, like you said, doesn't really understand.
And no other character that I could remember is engaged in a full-blown conversation with an R2 type of unit other than C-3PO.
Yeah.
Luke seems to have, a friendly little back and forths, but they're not really back and forths.
R2 must have some sort of sentence structure or language because, like you said, C-3PO is responding.
Oh, yeah, those are...
Now, that's probably for us. If the two droids were
those guys
real,
are... And you keep in mind, Lucas purposely did not give us subtitles.
Yeah. And
he wanted to keep it so that C-3PO could deliver both ends of the conversation, if you will.
Or we would eventually start to realize, like R2, it's like when you watch a foreign film. You sometimes forget the subtitles are there and you kind of catch on, even though you don't know French or you don't know Japanese.
Let's remember also who is partially responsible for R2-D2's sound. It's Ben Burtt.
Exactly.
Who some people might know him more recently for Wall-E, in terms of somebody who's very good sound effects designer who can infuse emotion to just plain old sounds.
Kids today, that's what they can relate to. Wally and Eve were communicating with each other.
There's little chirps and beeps and
exactly. Every now and then there'd be a word or a sound that comes across like English, but in reality they were just sound.
And granted, R2's sounds are a little different than Wally, but you can get a lot of range of emotion from all the different sounds we hear of him being hurt, of him warning people of something, of him trying to get attention. You know, there's a range of sounds that come from him. Now, from what I understand, even within the pantheon, if you will, of droids, there's a lot of different types that we meet throughout both trilogies. Obviously, by the time we got to the prequels, it more than tripled or quadrupled the amount of types of droids that we saw. But from what I understand and from all the EU that I've briefly looked at, or source books or materials, you have basically something like 5 different types. You have your what would be considered labor droids that are just there to pick up heavy objects and put them somewhere else. You have your technical droids, and that's kind of more like the R2-D2 types, the astromechs, droids that are there to help you navigate, or basically like little scientists, little experts at something. Your social droids, which are more like your interpreters, your protocol droids, your C-3PO types, droids that interact with humans and can communicate with them, unlike R2, or even some of these labor droids. You also have your military droids, which is very heavily featured in the prequels, with tons and tons of variations. You know, these are coming from all types of different worlds and manufacturing facilities, all of them basically working for the Separatist army. And the last type, if you want to call subsection, is the science or medical droids. And these are droids like 21B or FX7, you know, those medical type of repair droids. Now, let's talk a little bit about these different types of droids. With the technical droids, the R2 units, from what I understand, again, and this is all material that you don't find necessarily in the movie. I mean, you find little bits and pieces, but unfortunately, you have to do the research. You have to go through all these books.
Yeah, it wasn't spelled out.
Right. There is like a method to the madness. R2-D2 refers to, I mean, in reality, obviously, it's something that Lucas created, and the story is that it has to do with some film cans, numbers, and so forth. But the fiction part of what R2 means refers to a specific series of astromech. There's supposed to be R1s, R2s, R3s, R4s, and R5s.
Well, in the film, you see, on the blockade runner, you see what I guess would be an R3. Was it pointy head type of thing? Is that what they are?
Well, let's start with R1s, which I didn't know this until very recently.
You get that you see in the Sandcrawler.
In the Sandcrawler, when they're selling everybody, the one that looks like kind of Robbie the Robot type, it is circular, but it's almost like a refrigerator, the size.
I would imagine that didn't do a whole lot of moving. It would be on a Star Cruiser or some type of ship and interact with the ship and do tasks without having to move too much.
And this doesn't necessarily mean that R2 is a less functional unit than an R5. It's just different models.
Yeah.
So your R2s are basically the R2s we know now. It's that type of droid, you know, a solid body, a dome, you know, a solid dome. Your R3s, according to what I see here, are very similar to the R2s. They might just have different skin in terms of the coloring, or some of them are like bronze or copper.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, when you move to the R4s is when you start entering the triangular cone type of designs.
Now, again, I don't know if this might not be the original intent. This is stuff guys have put together years later and given names to characters who is that guy? Who is this guy?
When you look at them, you do notice the difference.
Yeah.
There's a variation of the R2s and R3s, which are your standard cylindrical body, but the dome is clear. There's a couple that you can actually see through the dome, all the gears inside.
Now, is there somebody in the Star Wars universe, like a Michael Okuda from Star Trek, who has been given the task of coming up with histories and names? Has there been? Because I got to tell you, growing up, Greedo had a name, but everybody else was Snaggletooth or Walrus Man or whatever. You know, I don't know where the name came from. I assume somebody knew, but was there somebody, or was this just made up? Did Walrus Man suddenly become Ponda Baba because some EU guy said, or is there a keeper of the names?
I think that it's a combination of both. Sometimes, I remember hearing an interview from Mark Hamill saying something like, when we were shooting the cantina scene, there was the guy with the butt face, and we called him Butt Face. And then when the action figure came out, they told him he was Walrus Man or Ponda Baba. And it's like, we didn't find out what was going to be the real names until way later.
Yeah.
But it was like work in progress type of. That's why you get a lot of stuff like Snaggletooth and Hammerhead.
The Death Star droid. I didn't know he had a name.
Hammerhead is not
Or
the race.
Pruneface.
They actually gave those type of creatures a name. I forget the name, but yeah, everything is like a work in progress. Obviously, especially in the earlier films. Now, as I said before, the fifth type of astromech is the R5 series, which is kind of like the R5D4. It's cylindrical body and a somewhat of a cylindrical head, not a triangular and not a dome, but something in between those two.
Yeah.
And that's the one that
Is that
explodes.
a rhombus?
I don't know.
But doesn't it seem like a missed opportunity when all we had was R2-D2 and R5-D4 and all these other droids? It seems like all they would have had to change figure-wise are just
But
the head and the colors.
It's
thicker.
funny because the variations are so insane that there is actually something between an R5 and an R4.
Well, now there's figures and there's representations in books.
There is the R5's head is actually a lot longer.
Yeah, it's taller
And then
with-
there's one that's kind of like an R5, but the head is a little shorter. It's still the same cylindrical design, but there's a variation in the sizes. And now, granted, some of them are for the prequels, so you could say, well, those are the earlier models, blah, blah, blah. But it's just variations, colors. It's all, the Jedi, depending on the color of your lightsaber, it's the color of
that
your
I think is a
ship,
bunch
it's
of
the color
nonsense.
of your droid.
Mace Windu has a purple droid because
So he's got- yeah,
because
it's-
he's the baddest pimp Jedi in town. I don't know if purple is really a appropriate color for a worker droid.
Now, the protocol droids, on the other hand, the most recognizable one we have is C-3PO.
Well, right from the very beginning, as soon as we see C-3PO, we see, I don't remember his friend's name, if he was even his friend, but there was a silver style or gray looking C-3PO.
As a matter of fact, there's a picture of him and this other one, and it's in one of the Topps cards, I believe, and people are still trying to find out what scene is that from, because the picture looks like they're standing next to each other.
Might have been just a
almost
promotional picture of
Right,
the
or they could have
actors.
been just passing by, taking a picture of, and people are wondering, well, what happened to this other guy? Well, it's funny, because a similar one to that shows up in one of the prequels, which is a completely silver one called TC-14.
Yeah, I think he's a different one.
But what's funny about it is that the movements are basically the same. The voice is different, obviously.
But you know what's funny? Listen to this. C-3PO was a style of droid. The Separatists were TC-1...
C-14.
Yeah. So now why would they have him? It just seems, when I think back on it, it's like, why would they have that style? They didn't look humanoid. They didn't look like humans.
It doesn't matter. Once again, you're dealing with toasters. So whether you're Chinese or German, you got to have a toaster.
Like, shouldn't the head of TC-14 been more Neomodian looking?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because in the original conceptual drawings of the Separatist army, the battle droids, what they look like now, they look some kind of bizarre thin creature with a very long snout head. Well, the Nemodiums, I believe, originally were drawn, as conceptual drawings I'm talking about, as these very reptilianish, thin, long head. So therefore, their army resembled their bodies. They made them in their own
Kind of like
image.
the real version of what General Grievous looked like. The real version had a similar shape head.
Yeah, but I'm saying the Nemodians ended up looking almost like a frog type of thing. But no, the original concept was a very long head, like a battle droid.
Okay.
But, the whole issue of battle droids and military hardware, we didn't touch that upon at all in the original trilogy. The original trilogy, the closest you get to nasty droids are either bounty hunters, IG-88, and Forlom.
Or in Bespin, when C-3PO stumbles upon another droid that looks like him.
And he blows him off or
he kind
something.
of gives curses at him, it seems, or something.
Or the torture droids from Jabba, which
Well,
are nasty droids.
That bugs me.
Or the torture droid on the Death Star that's approaching Princess Leia. Now, let's talk about the Jabba droids.
Yeah, they annoy me. I have a problem with this. Why is a droid torturing a droid? Are we supposed to believe... I mean, obviously they have feelings in the sense that R2 communicates with Luke, and when Luke is mad at him, he can give off some type of sound, and you can tell C-3PO has some sort of implied emotion when he's talking to R2 about how Luke is upset with him, things like that. But why is the Gonk being tortured with heat? What is the point? And couldn't the Gonk kind of turn off his feelers for that or something? I just don't know. It bugs me.
Yeah.
This is a problem I have with the creators, whoever was writing. Obviously, it was supposed to be a funny little scene that showed, see how this is how depraved Jabba's palace can be. Anything can happen. The guys are getting roughed up. people are getting slimed on, slave girls are getting dropped into
I think
the
that's
Rancor.
the problem. The problem is that, and again, hopefully when they put out the making of Return of the Jedi book, we'll get some insight into this. But something tells me they wanted to show the audience how mean Jabba was. And normally the way to do it is to show him, let's say, torturing a creature or a human being. That would have been too offensive for young children. So you have it, move it to a droid, which makes it kind of funny and cute, and you get the point. You get the message. But unfortunately, it screws up your credibility a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it still bugs me, like the Gonk crying out loud.
No.
Yeah, it's like, these are droids. First of all, why would droid on droid crime?
It's rampant on Tatooine.
No, I mean, I'm being a little silly because they're trying to explain to C-3PO, this is what happened to our last translator. He happened to have the same pose as C-3PO as he was being dragged off. And then the Gonk is being spun upside down. I mean, what was next? Waterboarding?
Again, it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you want to somehow, work around it, you could say, well, they do torture everybody. That day, they just happen to be torturing droids.
Because there were other creatures in the jails as they were bringing Han and Chewie or whatever.
Yeah. Let's take a little break now and give you some information on an upcoming event we're going to be participating in. Coming up on October 11th through the 14th, we have New York Comic Con once again. We were there last year with our Geekfest Rants booth, and we are going to be there once again this year, representing our podcast and having fun at the convention. For those of you not very familiar with Comic Con, especially New York Comic Con, they do it every year. It's been at the Jacob Javits Center for a number of years now. And to give you an idea of the type of guests that you will have a chance to meet if you go, you have Adam West, the original Batman from television. The cast of The Walking Dead is going to be there to talk about their new season and some of the new characters who are guests. Not only is Andrew Lincoln going to be there, but some of these new upcoming eagerly awaited characters like Michonne and the Governor, the actors who portray these characters, are going to be there, along with Michael Rooker and some other favorites. We have Bill Paxton, genre favorite, one of my personal favorites, from Aliens to True Lies to Titanic. If you're a fan of weird science, Bill Paxton has just about done it all. Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future will be there. Making an appearance like he did on Celebration 6, Ian McDermott will be there to participate in a panel and go and do the autograph rounds like a lot of these guys do. It's a great opportunity not only to listen to some of your favorite stars talk about what shows they're on and what movies they're making, but you also have an opportunity later in the day, on different days sometimes, to get their autograph. You purchase their autographs. It's a great way of, getting some good pictures. They're also going to have Jonathan Nolan, one of the creators of Person of Interest, will be there. Peter Davidson, one of the previous Doctor Who's from Lord of the Rings, Sean Austin. Seth Green from Robot Chicken. Terry O'Quinn, better known from Lost, but now part of 666 Park Avenue. Tom Felton from the Harry Potter films and Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And special musical guest, Ben Folds 5 will be performing a concert. One of the things about New York Comic Con that makes it different from some of the other conventions is that they go just about everywhere. It is not a specific genre convention. They hit just about everything you can think of. Television, film, horror, sci-fi, comedy, you name it, they hit it. Just like previous years, there's going to be a gigantic dealer's room where you can find just about any merchandise you can think of. Tons and tons and tons of panels. You could go and listen to either some of these stars talking about their experiences on the entertainment field, but tons of professional entertainment related panels having to do with comic book production, you name it, books, certain TV shows, movies, collecting, you name it. It is just unbelievable the amount of activities that you have. And let us not forget that even though Comic Cons have grown, just like San Diego Comic Con, New York Comic Con has grown beyond its original intended comic themes, there is tons and tons of comic book related material. Stan Lee usually makes an appearance here or there, and most of the major news outlets end up covering the events in one way or the other. So don't forget to join us October 11th through the 14th. That's a Thursday through a Sunday at the Jacob Javits Center in New York City. See you there. Now, there are a lot of things that once they started with the prequels, all these little red flags started going up. The prequels introduced the concept of R2 having rockets so he could fly for a little bit of time, not a lot of time.
And that wasn't really introduced until episode 2 because they couldn't get the props to work properly and they just abandoned it. There's a scene, a deleted scene, but there was supposed to be a scene where R2 falls off the Coruscant landing
platform.
pad.
Yeah.
And
He
the
just
rocket
bloop, 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 comes back up.
He shoots out his rockets, he comes back up, and everybody else goes about their business as if like, oh, nothing happened, I'm okay. But they abandoned that. There's scenes of it. It was shot, setups of it were shot.
On a blue screen
but
and
they
all that
weren't
stuff,
able to go any further, so they just abandoned it.
Now, the answer that
I'm waiting to ask.
the half-ass answer that
Why
they give
didn't
you
they appear in the
is
future?
how come they're not there anymore. What the books tell me is that those rocket, propulsion jets are very they break down a lot and they're very difficult to maintain. So at a certain point, they just remove them. So, okay, fine. After episode 3, they remove the rockets and now R2 can't fly anymore. Okay, well, hey, what are you going to do? There are other things that we were also wondering about, and there are certain things that we never knew. Like, for example, we knew that R2 could, he had multi-arms and he could connect to a lot of different equipment, and he could even shoot a little electricity and this and that, and he has like, like a fire extinguisher type of thing that comes out of him too. We never knew that he could eject apparently like a lot of oil and whatever that gasoline or whatever that is.
It seems to be at a certain point like James Bond
Oh,
gadgets. Yeah. I think that was like, okay, what can we do here? Oh, is it we need a funny scene? He's going to shoot out oil and light it. It's going to catch on
usually
fire.
Comic relief.
Yeah, especially in the prequels.
Now, the other thing we learned, which is kind of cool in a way, I guess, is that when R2 gets on one of the Naboo fighters, he actually has to extend his head.
The droid gets sucked in, rather than being lowered in like on the X-wing.
From the top, it comes from the bottom.
They get sucked up from the bottom, and then the head extends
like another
a giraffe.
foot or two.
Yeah, with a neck.
Right, like a neck rods or something.
Yeah. The funny thing we've overlooked, the whole point of what R2's purpose is. And we see that early in Phantom Menace, that these droids are
repair
in a
droids.
stable on a spaceship. In this case, it was the Queen's starship.
Yeah.
And they're there to perform these tasks, which include being sent on topside, exactly, where humans clearly couldn't go. Right. And they have clearly a magnetic attachment via their wheels, and they can perform repairs.
Right.
In flight. In this case, it was in battle.
Right. On large ships like that, that's how they do it. But they're also on fighters. They're supposed to help the pilot navigate. In other words, while the pilot's navigating, this droid is making computations and making repairs and adjusting things. This way the pilot can concentrate on the main job.
Here in these scenes, though, you see, like you say, to me, I like to give them, and I guess I'm just silly that way, I like to give the things around me more anthropomorphic, if I'm even using that word right, feelings. Like they're talking to me, I'm talking to them. It seemed like to these people, oh, we're losing a lot of droids. Like I dropped some quarters out the window when I got to the toll booth. Oops.
I lost the hubcap.
It's only after that they get saved. R2 is probably the last one, I guess.
Yeah, he was the last one.
He saves the day. And, who is this majestic droid? Oh, his name is R2-D2, Queen, or whatever, And
but it's almost like, especially
then you start to get a feeling like, oh, what an important droid he is.
It's almost as if, especially when you're dealing with some kind of royalty thing, it's almost like the slave performed exceptional, and all of a sudden, we're going to treat him a little better than a slave. It's that kind of weird.
Clearly, it's not quite that way, but it definitely seems that, like, people didn't care in a lot of...
It's almost like a subtle class system.
But actually, now that you mention it, with the royalty, he's just a machine until he saves the day. But Anakin, who had nothing, was really nothing himself. He was a slave. Mm-hmm. He was disrespected, it seems, from stories you hear, and his mother was treated badly. He built his own droids. He treated the droids in Watto's shop with respect, and it looked like he communicated with them as if they were his equals almost.
Right, and from what I'm saying, he built C-3PO to help his mom.
See, I guess I like that better. It's like, even my car, I don't treat my car like garbage. It's a machine. It's not talking to me, but there is an interaction that, look, I'll treat you well and wash you. You keep me on the road and not in a ditch. So I guess if my car could talk, which someday they might, people will be even more attached. They'll, she's a great car. I love that. I suppose there's that eventual outcome.
But they don't go too far. They don't get to the point where it's like somebody's marrying a droid or something.
No, but they do get to the point where R2 is part of the family. He's as important to Anakin and later Luke, depending on what order you're watching these movies.
Now, going back to Anakin and Luke, big thing to remember is that Anakin built C-3PO, and then C-3PO ends up showing up in front of Darth Vader at many times, and people were always saying, well, if he built them, wouldn't he recognize him in all these other movies? And
well, he was greenish. He had green legs, and he had silver parts and stuff like that.
he was a lot of different colors.
In Attack of the Clones. Now, Anakin did see C-3PO with Padme, but is he just so jaded and angry that he doesn't even care? I guess you got a point there. I never thought of it that way. I was more concerned with R2.
Well, up to Padme, it's still his. So
well, even
no big
it
deal.
annoys me. R2-D2 comes and gives a message to Ben Kenobi. Boy, I don't remember having any droids. Well, look, if somebody showed up with a 1980 Red Z-28, I'd say, well, geez, this looks awful familiar. I wonder if it's my old car.
For Obi-Wan, it's a combination of, number one, he could be lying like he's always lying.
Yeah, he's lying like a sack.
And theoretically, C-3PO was not Obi-Wan's droid. He's like, I don't remember owning a droid, meaning this droid.
Obi-Wan had a lot of interaction with R2 especially. He got him out of a lot of jams. And I'm not even talking about
even
the Clone
with
Wars.
C-3PO, they would like you to believe that, again, because they're just more equipment, it's like you saying, I don't remember that coffee maker. You know,
No. This is nonsense. Let me.
I don't remember this HP computer.
It's a movie, but again, if my car, the exact looking car, and it's had the same name, R2-D2 was clearly named, and C-3PO was clearly named in the prequels.
The R2 I knew could fly.
There you go. That must be it. This is an imposter. But it's like, I understand. It's a movie made 20 years
My
sooner.
Z-28 could fly.
But it's just, you would like a little bit of recognition, but they just can't, because you can't fix dead people. He's gone. They can't put, I mean, you'd have to change complete lines of dialogue.
The other big controversy, if you will, is why is it that they wipe out C-3PO's memory at the end of Revenge of the Sith? Therefore, he doesn't go out sputtering all kinds of nonsense.
I'll tell you why, because he's got a big mouth and he doesn't know to shut up.
But R2, they apparently don't.
He knows his place.
Now, what's interesting but think about this. What's interesting about R2 is that we don't know for a fact. In other words, if you look at the original trilogy, there's no hints that he knows a lot of stuff. In other words, all we know is that he served with Leia. But there's no real hints that he knew Darth Vader, that he lived in all these different places. We don't know any of that. He doesn't seem to be talking, but at the same time, they made a point of not deliberately wiping his memory.
Well, let's see, what year was that? As like an 8-year-old kid, I wouldn't have picked up on that. But looking at it now, Leia trusted him with this important information. So he was clearly better than your average droid. He wasn't just some droid. She had some kind of confidence that he would wind up getting to Ben Kenobi through his own guile or luck or skill or experience, because she's been on these adventures or somewhat of adventures with him, and she knows that's.
Or is the implication that at the end of Sith they both get wiped?
I guess it's possible, but my impression is R2 does not. It's not mentioned, and he probably doesn't get wiped. He's the guy who has everything, and thus C-3PO is only telling the events to the Ewoks that happen from where we come in.
But the thing is, again, the thing is that if R2 knows everything and C-3PO got wiped, does that mean that R2 is also keeping that from C-3PO? Because he knows C-3PO will blabber everything.
Yeah. Well, will he blab? I mean, I don't know if it's that diabolical or if it, it's.
Our master was Captain blah blah blah. Are you supposed to say that? Are you come on, dude? And the rebellion is like,
and I've got $20 in my back pocket.
What if Luke is like an Imperial trainee or something? It's like, shut up, dude.
I think these droids knew Luke was probably just they're somewhat intelligent. They have enough intelligence to know their circumstance. I think C-3PO probably was the only one wiped in that situation. And for whatever reason, it was just, the way Bale felt that day.
Now, what I also found interesting in the prequels is that the progression of, just like we looked at the progression of stormtroopers, is the progression of military droids. In other words, when we first saw Phantom Menace, we had the typical battle droid. And everybody kind of realized these are pretty simple, stupid droids. Then they kind of moved forward a little bit and said, all right, now we have super battle droids. Okay, they're tougher, but they're still kind of dumb. But they're tougher than the other ones. They're more armored, if you will.
Takes a few more shots to kill them.
Right. Then, if you actually jump into Clone War territory, they introduced the commando droids, which I like them much better than any of the previous ones. I wish I could see a live version of that because they're actually smarter and agile
Pretty
and more
quick.
threatening than these stupid, battle droids. It's just plain simple. Another thing that I found interesting is that, we're talking about personalities and the fact that these are just machines, but even in Empire Strikes Back, you're dealing with bounty hunters that are droids that don't work for anybody. They're individual
Yeah. So how do
creatures. They're individually motivated. And the backstory for some of them is that these are malfunctioning droids that decided they didn't want to work for the creator anymore, and some of them kill their own creators. Some of them were built as assassins.
Yeah, well, wasn't IG-88 part of the intergalactic banking clan? They're enforcers or
IG-88
something?
is, again, this is EU territory,
yeah.
but they do give it a backstory that this is a droid that went kind of rogue.
But there was a series of droids that were considered IG-86 based on
Right.
the prototypes for the Clone Wars.
The
which
IG-88
you can-
line, right, right.
I mean, we can dance back and forth into that as if it doesn't exist. I mean, I think it has more credence than the books in the EU series and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not in the movies. But IG-88 is in the movies, and he comes from someplace. And the same thing with 4LOM. Where is he from? But he's a good example of his head matching the creatures he probably works for.
Well,
Because
if you
he has more of
believe-
a fly-looking
Yeah,
head.
if you believe the
but
particular...
but a protocol body.
If you believe the particular EU that you happen to be reading, there's a backstory that 4LOM was kind of like, he used to run like a hotel, let's say a luxury hotel, and he became like a jewel thief or something, and then he kind of ventured on his own
Well,
to
now
become
you're-
a professional.
Now you're getting just plain silly.
Well, again, that's EU territory
Okay.
you're threatening on, and as much as you might not like it, well, there's a reason why he's standing in front of Vader.
okay,
It's like,
well, yes, he is there, and I guess he's the throwback. But in hindsight, wouldn't it have made it a little more interesting to have a 4LM style droid appear as a commando style droid or something like that? I don't know. It just would be interesting if something like that showed up in the prequel.
It depends. Yeah, it all depends. The other interesting thing is also the fact that through robotics, let's say, in this world, there are certain circumstances where you have combination of robots and creatures.
Well, how about Darth Vader?
Well, Darth Vader, yeah,
Luke,
he's
Anakin.
Well,
Anakin
most,
is Darth
he's
Vader.
he's more machine than man. Anakin had a
General
similar.
Grievous is actually the best example of
Yeah.
it because it seems to me all that was left of Grievous was part of his head,
part of his
part
head
of
and
his
a little
spinal
bit of
column,
his
and
organs
some
and-
guts,
Right.
a conglomeration of guts.
But remember, you also have Lobot, who is a combination of mainly human, but he has some prosthetic or robotic attachments.
But he seems to have his own personality. It's like, that is interesting you mentioned him because I would forget about him if you didn't. I wonder what the point of that is. Like what?
What I read is that the attachments on his head is something so that he can control and communicate with the city that he works for rather than verbally communicating.
Are there others like that, or is he the only one?
I don't know. Return of the Jedi. Remember that spider-looking thing with a brain?
Yeah, that's supposed to be a monk whose bodies get put into
All that's
this.
left is the brain.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, yeah, there's a lot of circumstances like that where you see all these, like, oh, that's interesting. Luke has a robotic hand.
Yeah, that's
you
what I
know?
mean. Like, at some point, who's controlling whom?
The other aspect of droids that are completely non-personal, the extreme of it is a lot of them you see like the vulture droids where they're ships, but they're also droids, and a lot of the Federation
Yeah,
that looks like
those
ships.
are considered droids, but those bug me. I know there are droids, and for the purposes of this podcast, but that kind of bugs me a little bit. Like,
But there's a lot of, like I said before, there's a lot of what looks like vehicles that are supposed to be droid vehicles. The Hellfire droid, the Spider droid, the Octopura droid.
Yeah.
These are gigantic vehicles. They're like the tank droid.
now, are they all provided as a result of the Neomodians, or are they just because of the various separatists?
No, it's the various
Some use this style and some
Yes.
use that style, and they all
It's a combination
form an
of
army.
all these different separatist conglomerates, let's say, that supply them with ships, but these are not manned ships. There's no manning the ship. It's combination droid ship.
And one might say, well, where are all the droids during A New Hope? Well, I would venture a guess. It's like, where are all the Nazis? They either are broken down and put in jail, and in the case of a robot, they're just destroyed. They don't want any. The Emperor wouldn't have wanted this other army's droids floating around. A lot like we're talking about, why would they want old clones hanging around?
Right.
So they probably just... There's actually an episode of the Clone Wars, not to go into that neighborhood, but of droids, of battle droids that have been repurposed, that are more friendly, and they actually help in some cases.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So I would venture a guess that the Emperor would say the droids are turned off, and they get dismantled and scrapped and, reused
Plus,
for ships and various
You also got to remember, with the original trilogy, especially Star Wars, Tatooine is a world that's out there, and all they get to see is like used cars.
Yeah, the droids
they don't
that showed
get
up there,
top of the line anything.
I mean, there's a droid. There's backstory about the droid that sees C-3PO and R2C on the Sandcrawler.
Too many.
He's kind of humanoid looking. A Death Star droid, a silver version of him, shows up on there. I mean, that I think they're just repurposing.
With the prequels,
they didn't build as many models. They're just repurposing.
With the prequels,
them.
is the only chance you get to see the height of all this production of commercial droids, if you will.
And that's very interesting because, like, C-3PO goes into that assembly line. It's like our car assembly lines, but on a major scale. And he's like, machines building machines. Like, even to him, he seems
obscene.
Fascinated by it because he was built by Anakin out of spare parts. And I don't know where a droid gets its personality. Anakin obviously probably had some sort of connection there, just from what we know of Anakin. He's special. But, like, when C-3PO was turned on for the first time, like, he seems to have a personality.
And by turned on, you mean activated.
Yeah. Well, there's a card, there's a Topps card that talks about exactly how turned on he can get.
The mythical Topps card.
It's not mythical. I can show it to you. But it's amazing. Like, he does have a personality where I guess the droid in Bespin, like, it was basically telling him to go pound salt, doesn't. He's a nasty guy. But TC-14 has a very gentle, soothing kind of personality. So there's just so much. I mean, there's more than two grown men should actually be thinking about. And that's why I think when we do these shows, we ask as many questions as we try to answer on how, but it's just amazing, like, how this all comes about.
Obviously, they do serve a purpose as far as the storytelling part of this is. And like I said before, they're the comic relief and they're the narrators, if you will. They're the tour guides. They're not meant to be the central story of this, saga. They're bit players that somebody has to take the time and has to create some kind of a story and kind of rules of where they fit in this whole
And that's
thing.
what I like. I like to break that down to try to see, does it make sense?
Does it work? Right.
And like the clone troopers and stormtroopers, there is an order. It does make sense in the big picture.
Right.
It's when we get to the point where we break it down to the minutia that sometimes we find flaws in the logic, but it's not enough to destroy the whole illusion.
Right, and how deep the stories go, unfortunately all we have now is the Clone Wars to help us with that. And like you said, we did have that special episode that dealt with these leftover droids and stuff like that. Not only that, but it's kind of like, do you really want to explore, just like you did with clones, whether or not they should have the rights of all that normal humans have? Do you really want to explore, should droids have the rights? That's a whole other sci-fi world to explore.
Yeah, like Han Solo is very sarcastic towards C-3PO in particular.
This isn't Blade Runner.
Yeah, he does interact with other droids. There's a droid on the Falcon that's trying to help him in the Hoth hangar.
Yeah.
I think he's not a droid hater. I think he's just trying to give C-3PO the business because they rub each other the wrong way. And that's a good plot. That's actually Irvin Kershner trying to make these characters belong, with each other. But it does ask a lot of questions with the droids. Like, do they have any control over their own lives, or are they just plain old machines? And I think in some cases,
depends on their owner.
I think in some cases, yes, they have a bit of independence, good and bad. And in other cases, they're just doing a job, and we get the benefit of seeing them.
Cool. Well, I hope this exhausts any questions anybody might have about Star Wars droids.
If not,
and
feel free to write Carlos.
But like James said, like it or not, and I'm sure some of you out there, sit down and have these conversations, and hopefully we can give you as much of the information that's out there that closely resembles, the films. Because just like in any other subject having to do with Star Wars, you can fall into the deep end of the pool by going to the EU. So it's up to you which way you want to go.
Next week, we solve world peace.
Anyway, I'd like to thank James once again for joining us, and you guys for listening. And we'll see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
I'm TC-14 at your service. This way, please. We are greatly honored by your visit, ambassadors. Make yourselves comfortable. My master will be with you shortly.
Corporal. We'll cover you. Roger, roger. Uh-oh. Blast him. Good boy, I got you.
Someone to see you, honey. Jedi by the looks of him.
Do you want a cup of jar with juice?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hey, you. No droids. Get out of here.
Oh my goodness. Shut me down. Machines making machines. How perverse. Oh, calm down, R2. I almost fell.
Buzz droids.
R4, be careful. You have a... Oh dear.
Come in, R2.
What that?
R2, do you copy? R2, activate the elevator number 31174.
Get back to work. That nothing. Hey, you.
Now, that's better.
You stupid little astro droid.
Hello there.
General Kenobi. You are a bold one. Back away. I will deal with this Jedi slime myself.
Your move.
You fool! I've been trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku.
Medically, she's completely healthy. For reasons we can't explain, we are losing her.
She's dying.
We don't know why. She has lost the will to live. We need to operate quickly if we are to save the babies.
Babies?
She's carrying twins.
Captain Antilles.
Yes, Your Highness.
I'm placing these droids in your care. Treat them well, clean them up. Have the protocol droids mind wiped.
What? Oh no.
Stop.